The unique cultural atmosphere of the 1980s emerged from a relationship between the subjectivity of social environments, the availability of diverse materials, and a response to the economics, politics, and popular trends which all contributed to the spirit of the times. These elements shaped how people expressed themselves and how it influenced the creative process of artists. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, three distinct cultural movements emerged in New York City. First, there was disco, with its iconic styles of dress and music. Then punk developed, which had its own music, its own fashion, and a rebellious attitude. Finally, hip-hop culture emerged, introducing rap and breakdancing. These three worlds coexisted in New York City, each with its own unique interests, influences, and forms of expression. During this period, street art flourished, with Jean-Michel Basquiat emerging as one of its brightest stars. Starting at age 18, his work was initially under the tag Samo, meaning same old, a critique of art that came before. By 20, he was showing in galleries, and by 21, he was featured in major exhibitions worldwide, becoming a critically recognized artist internationally. His street art was notably text-based and poetic, often featured crossed out words that reflected his cultural heritage as an African-American artist with family roots in Puerto Rico and Haiti. Beyond his street art, Basquiat appeared in films and music videos. He was in Blondie's Rapture video, and he was also a musician. His work commands astronomical prices. Some paintings sell for $100 million, making him one of the most valuable artists of the past 50 years. Tragically, he never witnessed his success, as he died at the age of 27. His art explored a broad range of topics, from Black culture to Hollywood to sports and everyday life. A pivotal moment that deeply influenced his work was the death of his friend Michael Stewart, a street artist who died after being beaten by police officers for creating art on a subway platform, a non-violent act that ended tragically. While this is just a brief overview of Basquiat, who was truly a game changer in many ways, he'll be discussed again in the Three Ring Circus lecture this week, and of course you have the Basquiat film that you will be quizzed on in week 5. Keith Haring is another street artist from the early 1980s who you might be familiar with. Today, places like Uniqlo sells t-shirts featuring both Basquiat and Haring's work on their products. Rather than talking more about this now, there's a short video for you to watch from around 1982. It's in the week 4 list on Brightspace. In terms of the creative process, and what I really want to highlight, is this fascinating relationship between the subjective artists who were working with simple materials like chalk on subway signboards or spray paint, opening their art to venues where public had access. It wasn't about vandalism. It was about sharing, expressing, communicating, and bringing ideas to a broader public. They refused to feel contained or limited. As we discussed with the Fluxus artists, conceptual art, performance art, and even the earth art, it was all about anti-establishment, moving against market values because art was free and should be open to the public. Granted, many years later, much of these artists are selling for considerable sums, but it remains an important cultural thread through the 1980s. A very brief aside in the context of Hans Christian Andersen's story, The Emperor's New Clothes, where there was a king who spent the kingdom's money on personal luxuries like decorations, his living quarters, food, especially his clothes. He was obsessed with his appearance. Then 2 con men saw an opportunity and exploited his vanity. They approached the king claiming to sell extraordinarily expensive clothes made of invisible cloth. This cloth, they explained, was visible only to people with virtues and intelligence and people who were worthy. In reality, there were no clothes at all. The king, not wanting to appear foolish, pretended he could see these magnificent fabrics. Then the 2 con men pretended to make his clothes, and then they dressed him. When the king then paraded through the town with his new clothes, actually wearing nothing at all, the townspeople also pretended they could see these spectacular garments. But No one dared speak the truth, fearing they'd be seen as idiots or they just want to go along with the crowd. Finally, a child from the crowd cried out, "The king isn't wearing any clothes at all." This simple truth revealed the reality that everyone realized and were all understandably tricked. This story relates to much of the art from the 80s and 90s that I'm about to show you. It's up to you and your role as the viewer, the viewing audience, to question the collective delusions the Emperor's New Clothes effect has on people. Do people truly believe some of it is art, good art, important art, expensive art? It's all built on a belief system which is deeply connected to the construction of historic narratives that supports these myths. Or not. In the lecture about the 1970s, there was not much traditional painting shown beyond the photorealists' work. This wasn't like the pre-World War I expressionists or the post-World War II abstract expressionists. In the late 1970s, a group of neo-expressionists emerged, representing an interesting third wave of expressionism. The term neo appears frequently in the 1980s as artists were repurposing earlier artistic techniques. Julian Schnabel, for example, followed Robert Rauschenberg's Combine approach, but he put his own twist on things, where he would take broken plates and bottles and glasses and attach them to a canvas, using this as a foundation to build upon. In Germany, Martin Kippenberger explored the relationship between commerce and culture. His paintings of himself walking drunk down a street captures an unreal environment during the height of the 1980s economics and Cold War, particularly in Germany. This showed how he was literally and figuratively floating through that environment. Pop art evolved into what we now call neo-pop art. One prominent artist of this movement was Jeff Koons. A fascinating piece of his is called the Equilibrium Tank, which features 3 basketballs all signed by the basketball player Dr. J. These basketballs were submerged and floating at the same height in a tank. And you might wonder, how is it possible since basketballs normally would have floated on water? The secret lies in the use of mercury, that the weight was inside of the basketballs, making them sink to a specific level. This piece sets the stage for the art world I'm about to discuss in the 1980s. Since there's a student talk about Jeff Koons, we'll wait for that presentation to offer more examples of his work. Another notable artist in the neo-pop category is Yayoi Kusama. Her trajectory differed significantly in that she initially worked within the Fluxus movement as a minimalist artist and in various other areas. Kusama, who has been open about her mental health, including her obsessive-compulsive disorder, has spent time in institutions while maintaining an incredibly productive career since the 1950s, focusing primarily on one motif: circles. We discussed Robert Ryman's white paintings as being a consistent theme throughout his career. Kusama's work differs in that it shows a distinct obsessive-compulsive quality in her circles, which often appears in flowers and in pumpkin forms. Many people know her infinity rooms, which are installations of reflected circles created by various ways incorporating light and sometimes combined with paint. As we saw a progression from geometric abstract painting to op art and color field painting, this era also saw an emergence of neo-geometric paintings, also known as Neo-Geo. Peter Halley is a significant figure in this movement. His work focuses on combinations of cells and conduits, while geometric abstract painting from the 1950s aimed to avoid meaning or references. Halley embraces this symbolism of form. In his work, cells represent various enclosed spaces, from rooms or prison cells or even biological cells. The conduits connect these cells, symbolizing different connective elements like hallways, water pipes, or electrical wires. Halley was fascinated by how this relationship between cells and conduits reflect the structures of our built environments, from cities to the constructed world we inhabit. The Pictures generation refers to a group of artists connected to a New York gallery called Metro Pictures. They were a specific group of artists who specialized in blending different subjects, For example, Ashley Bickerton used pop images to create what appeared to be flotation devices, similar to what I mentioned earlier about Martin Kippenberger's floating imagery. To understand Bickerton's work, imagine that the essential products you would take to a deserted island. That's one way to think about his creative process. Cindy Sherman, who has been active since the early 1980s, became well known for her self-portraits that recreate scenes from famous films, essentially creating selfies. Her work evolved into self-portraits that were inspired by horror films and various character types that always maintain a referential relationship to famous paintings or other cultural resources. We're going to see more from Cindy Sherman in an upcoming student presentation. Another Pictures Generation artist, Jenny Holzer, worked exclusively with words in a format she calls truisms, presented in various ways, projected onto buildings or displayed on signs, always conveying basic truths. This notable projection appeared in Australia, and recently, in 2024, she had a major exhibition at the Guggenheim in New York City, where words cascaded down the entire rotunda spiral. It's worth noting that these last three artists were all women, a significant shift in our discussions from previous lectures. Another female artist in this Pictures Generation is Barbara Kruger, who focused on a critique of media, examining advertising, consumer culture, and propaganda. Her work maintained a consistent palette of red, white, and black, often juxtaposing images with text, while expressing a strong feminist perspective. The Pictures Generation also included several male artists like Richard Prince, who critiqued Hollywood and media. He became known for his one-liners, a play on the 1950s concept of the signature style, which had become somewhat of a joke in the art world. Like a comedian's quick punchline, Prince created paintings that were literally one-liners, though some later became a little bit more painterly. Christopher Wool's work was heavily influenced by punk culture and New York City's gritty urban atmosphere. He frequently incorporated text from films like Apocalypse Now. One piece featured a quote, "Sell the house, sell the kids, sell the car." Another reads, "Run, run." As his creative process developed, text became patterned, leading to interesting merged compositions. Joyce Pensado was also deeply influenced by the raw New York City punk scene. These works were particularly interesting because they were playful references to abstract expressionism, creating circles and forms that somehow accidentally were transformed into cartoon-like figures. Felix Gonzalez Torres, who we discussed in our first class, created several notable works, including Perfect Lovers. He was particularly famous for his candy installations, where visitors are invited to take a piece of candy from large piles displayed in the museum. These interactive pieces challenge the traditional "don't touch the art" rule in most art spaces. The candy installations, of which he created several variations using different types of candy, are all replenished daily. The weight of the candy deliberately references his partner, who also died of AIDS. As his partner's health declined, his diminishing weight became a daily measurement, something those of you in health sciences will recognize as a critical indicator. The sweetness of the candy creates a poignant metaphor, while the diminishing pile represents his partner's fading physical presence. This theme of life and loss appears throughout Felix Gonzalez Torres' work. Beyond his gallery installations, he created public art pieces, including billboards displaying photographs of two pillows with visible head indentations. These billboards were placed in residential neighborhoods throughout New York City. They weren't about selling something, rather, they invited viewers to contemplate their own experience of loss and relationships. Another significant series featured simple strings of lights, like those you might find in a backyard. These lights arranged in ascending or descending patterns, evoking spirits or souls floating upward. The warm glow of the lights created a tender connection between the physical and the spiritual, suggesting both presence and transcendence. Alfredo Jar is an artist from Chile. In his public art piece, "This Isn't America's Flag," asked the question, "Is this correct? This is not America?" That's America. And his piece was essentially a large billboard in Times Square. It highlights the very New York centric, America centric way of thinking. I've experienced this while traveling in Europe and meet some English speaking people and ask the question, "Are you American?" And they might respond to you saying, "Yeah, I'm from North America, but I'm from Canada," which reveals an interesting relationship between these identities. We will discuss more of this global worldview in the next lecture about the 1990s.